Welcome to this special live broadcast and digital stream of our candidate forum in the 2nd Congressional District, sponsored by the Public Radio, the Providence Journal, and the University of Rhode Island. Rhode Island voters will decide the state's next member of Congress when the current election ends November 8th. Democrat Seth is completing his 2nd term as General Treasurer of the state. Republican Allan Fung is the longtime former mayor of Cranston, and independent candidate Bill Gilbert ran as the moderate party candidate for governor in 2014. This evening, we'll explore many of the top issues facing Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District and how the candidates propose to address them. We're coming to you before a live audience at the University of Rhode Island in Kingston, and we're broadcasting on 89.3 FM. We're also streaming this event, which you can pick up at the providencejournal.com. I'm Ian Donnis, political reporter for the Public Radio. I'll be joined in asking the candidates questions by Patrick Anderson, State House reporter for the Providence Journal, and Juliana Lepore, news editor at the Good 5 Cent Cigar. Before we start, I want to ask our audience to please remain quiet until the end of our forum when you can express your support for your preferred candidate. We also ask that you do not display signs. The focus here is on the candidates, what they have to say, and it will cut into their time if there are distractions. This is not a formal debate, and we're not going to be giving equal time and formal rebuttals to each and every candidate. Rather, we're looking for a lively discussion. There are no strict time limits, but we have a lot of ground to cover, and we will interrupt if you go off script or do not answer the question. Let's start with Mr. Fung. You say you accept the results of the 2020 presidential election, but Kevin McCarthy, the GOP leader in the U.S. House, was one of 139 Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives who voted against certifying the results of that election. Why should Rhode Islanders vote to strengthen the influence of the party that is associated with denying the results of a free and fair election?
Oh, first and foremost, I do want to take a moment to thank URI, thank NPR, as well as, the Public Radio and the Providence Journal for hosting this very important forum. And let me get to that first question, because yes, January 6th was a very dark day in our country's history, and I spoke out on that day. And one, I recognize Joe Biden is the legitimate president of the United States. I'm going down there. First and foremost, my first vote will be to replace Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, because it is her policies on top of President Biden's that are leading to the disastrous economy that we are facing right now as a country in our backyards. That's what I'm going down for. And my record, 12 years as mayor, has been being someone that's thoughtful, independent, doing the right thing for all of our residents, working in a bipartisan manner, and that's the type of leadership and skills that I will bring down to Washington, D.C. to tackle these problems that are caused by this failed presidency, as well as Speaker Pelosi.
Mr. Fung, you blame the Democrats in Washington for the state of the economy, the high inflation, the high gas prices, but the pandemic, the effect on global supply chains and work habits and consumer behavior, weren't those huge factors on the economy as well?
There were a lot of factors, but most importantly, the unchecked, out-of-control spending coming out of this Nancy Pelosi-led Congress is a big reason why inflation is at 40-year record highs, 8 to 9%. Many of the mothers, the fathers, grandparents, people on fixed income, people like my mother who's sitting in that front row that's reliant on her Social Security check are getting crippled because their incomes are not keeping up with this record high inflation that's driving up gas prices, grocery prices, the fact that mothers couldn't get formula for their babies. That's not the country that I want to live in. That's why I'm going down to Washington, D.C. to fight for all of us.
Mr. Magaziner, you and your campaign have been sounding the alarm about what you call Republican extremism, about January 6th and how Mr. Fung would potentially add to a Republican majority. But a series of polls show Mr. Fung with a small lead over you, meaning that slightly more than half of voters in the district are unpersuaded by your concerns. How come?
Well, listen, January 6th was a dark day for our country, and the worst part was not just the actions of the violent mob that tried to stop the legal counting of votes, and it was not even the action of Donald Trump who incited that violent mob. The most shameful actions that day were the more than 100 Republican members of the House of Representatives who went back into that chamber when there was still smoke in the air and the blood of police officers on the floor, and voted to overturn the will of the people. It was a shameful day. And I cannot believe that I have to say this, but we should not have election deniers in charge of the House of Representatives, especially heading into a presidential election cycle. And Allan has made clear time and time again that his first vote would be to put Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan and election deniers in charge of the House. Now listen, I'm not talking about all Republicans here. As my time as state treasurer, I worked across the aisle to pass a historic school construction program, to pass a number of bills, including one good one with a Republican lead sponsor to help Rhode Islanders with disabilities. And there were over 60 Republican members of the House who did the right thing and who went back and voted to certify the will of the people. So, Allan, you could vote for one of them to be the next Speaker of the House. But will you pledge right now that you will not vote for Kevin McCarthy or one of the election deniers to be in charge of the House of Representatives?
I'm voting to replace the person that you support
You won't answer the
100%,
question.
Nancy Pelosi. And this is where, you know, even your number two, Nancy Pelosi's number two, who's supporting you, Steny Hoyer, has recognized I'm not extreme. But you want to lump me into that extreme, and it doesn't fit the mold. That's why people aren't believing your message. My message is about talking about what's on the minds of people in the district and in Rhode Island.
We
And
should
it's
not
this
have
cost of
people
living
who
crisis.
voted to
Seth, are
overturn
you
the
gonna let me-
election
Seth,
in
are you
charge
gonna
of
let
the
me
House of
finish, please?
Representatives.
Please.
Go ahead.
It's about the economic crisis that the policies that you have supported for Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden that have crippled our economy. We're talking about what we're facing. Many of the people, not only in the audience, but in the district across Rhode Island, facing a 47% electricity increase, 15% on gas. I just topped off my home heating oil tank, and it wasn't even empty, $850. I want to go down there to fight for many of the individuals in our backyards, like my mother, like every other mother and father that's on a fixed income across the district.
Mr. Fung,
That's what this election is about.
Let me stop you there.
Take my time back
We're
here.
shortly going to go to
Yeah.
Bill Gilbert, but hang on, Mr. Magaziner. How do you respond to Mr. Fung's
Well, listen.
view? Hang on a second. How do you respond to Mr. Fung's view that Democrats in Washington are largely responsible for mishandling the
So
economy?
first of all, let the record show that once again he is committed to putting election deniers in charge of the House of Representatives heading into a presidential year. Listen, when it comes to the cost of living, I've spent time all across the district, particularly in senior centers, and I hear from people the frustration. People are working hard and their incomes are not keeping up with their bills. And there's a number of things that we can do to crack down on inflation and help working people that I am prepared to support in Congress. I have called from the very beginning for suspending the gas tax, for expanding domestic energy production to increase supply and lower the cost of living. I have called for capping the cost of prescription drugs, which is killing seniors.
Okay, we can get
all
into
across
this
our
in
state.
greater
But
detail.
there is a clear difference between the parties on this,
All right,
which is that I have also said time and time again that if we really want to do something about the cost of living, we have to crack down on the price gouging that is happening by the big oil companies and the pharma companies.
Thank you,
The
Mr.
big oil
Magaziner.
companies
We're
are
gonna
making
move- we're gonna
hundreds
move-
of
we're gonna
billions
move
of
on, Mr.
dollars while
Magaziner.
people are hurting.
We're gonna move on.
That is wrong, and I'm the only candidate that will call that out.
Bill Gilbert, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with what some people call the two-party duopoly, Democrats and Republicans, the kind of hyper-partisanship and what strikes many people as gridlock in Washington. You're running as an independent, but you've run a very low-profile campaign. I don't think I've gotten a single news release from you. What are you about? What's your point? Why are you running?
Sure. I want to thank everybody for having me. Thank the Public Radio, URI, the Good 5 Cent Cigar. One of the things that I've tried to do for the last 10 years is actually take out this hyper-partisanship. Exactly what you see going on right here. There's gridlock. People aren't listening to each other anymore. Republicans and Democrats, it's both our fault. It's everybody's fault for not doing something different. What I see today is we're still running against Trump and he's not in office. Here's what I need. I need, as I'm an elector too, I'm gonna be voting in this election. I've got a bunch of kids, I got 3 grandkids, we're all here in Rhode Island. And you know what I need? I need the Democrats. I need Mr. Seth Magaziner to go, you know what? Trump had some good policies. And I need Allan Fung to say, but Trump was an ass. Because Trump was an ass, but he had some good policies. We need to roll back the time. We need to come back to the energy policies that Trump had. And they weren't really Trump's. They were just conservative, good old values. The green energy deal is a fraud. It's a fake. We do not have wind energy. We do not have solar energy that can replace our energy right now. That's why it's 47% increase. If you want to increase our electric cars from 3% to 30%, you're going to get more energy. You're going to have more electricity. If you want to talk about, we need a national energy policy, we need a national foreign policy. You know, we got Russia over there tapping on the door of Poland and Ukraine, and instead we're talking about this kind of stuff. We need to stop the hyperpartisanship. We need to be able to go back to the water cooler and the dinner table and talk about some really difficult discussions.
All right,
and if we can't do that, I think the country's struggling. I really do. We need to heal.
Thank you. We're going to go to a question from Patrick Anderson.
I'm going to follow up because everyone is talking about the cost of living. It comes up in the polls, and we'll just get right into the specifics. Mr. Fung, you released an energy plan, and this is your top issue, but there aren't many specifics in the energy plan. Can you describe the specific policies that you would pursue and Republicans would pursue in Washington to lower the cost of living, to lower inflation and gas prices?
I disagree with you, your premise that there's nothing in there, because first and foremost, we have to become energy independent again. That's what my plan is about, making sure that first we tap into those drilled but uncompleted wells, those DUCs. That could be the first source for us to be able to get some of that oil and gas that's already been drilled out of the ground back into the energy supply. It's a supply issue. Second of all, we've got to cut through a lot of the regulatory hurdles that this president that he supports has put as a roadblock to expanding energy. I support an all-energy policy as we transition over to properly sited renewable energy. And lastly, I am not here sitting, unlike my opponent here, who wants to talk about increasing taxes, because what he failed to mention when he was talking about what he wanted to do, TCI, he wanted during these critical times when people are facing high energy costs to unleash new higher taxes on gasoline, home heating oil, and anything else to finance his local version of the Green New Deal. I agree with Bill about that. We've got to do it in a proper way, all energy process as we transition forward.
Asking about that, but on the Inflation Reduction Act, which you opposed, and I believe Republicans also opposed the Manchin permitting deal, which would have speeded energy permitting and a bunch of different energy sources. Like you said, why did you oppose that, and why did Republicans oppose that if that's important?
I can speak for myself and what I can tell you, because, look, whether it's that bill or any other bill, I'm always going to do a thoughtful analysis and look and work across the aisle. But on that bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, it added billions in new taxes that would hurt many of us during the worst economic times we're facing. 40-year record recession highs. And it also had in there 87,000 new IRS agents that would have been targeting the middle class. 87,000 is ridiculous. It's larger than the population of Cranston. And this is the bill that he
Mr.
supports.
Magaziner, how do you respond?
We could spend the rest of our hour here talking about all the things that are wrong that he just said, but let me take a step back here, all right? So listen, we need to expand domestic energy production and become more energy independent. That has to happen. And listen, we need to be tough with the oil companies in order to do it. And this is the big difference here. The big five oil companies made over $150 billion of profits, not revenue, profits, while Rhode Islanders were paying up to $5 a gallon for gas. That is unconscionable. And yes, I do support legislation that would say that when gas prices are high and the oil companies are still making hundreds of billions and lining their own pockets, they should be required to give some of those profits back to the consumer in rebates, back into people's pockets. We have to crack down on the price gouging that is killing consumers. It also is true in the pharmaceutical industry and all across the board. Now listen, Allan and the Republicans in Congress don't support that. Why? because the oil companies are funding their campaigns. You've seen the tacky negative ads that they're running against me. You know who's funding those ads? Chevron, the American Petroleum Institute, the Koch brothers. It's all public record because they know that I will be tough on price gouging. I will make sure that those runaway oil profits make it back into consumers' pockets in the form of lower prices. And they know that if the Republicans take control of Congress, they will be in the pocket of that industry. As far as the Inflation Reduction Act goes, since you asked for it, here's what that bill would do. Cap the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. Make the cost of insulin $35 a month starting in January. Expand the ability of the IRS to go after tax cheats, but importantly, what he didn't tell you is that it specifically says that it would not go after any family making less than $400,000 a year. So yeah, do I think that Elon Musk and the billionaires shooting spaceships into outer space should be forced to go through some audits to make sure they're not hiding their taxes overseas? Yes, of course. But listen, we have to get serious about cracking down on the big oil companies, the big drug companies that are gouging people. Everything else, if you're not willing to do that, is window dressing.
We're going to go to a question from Juliana Lepore.
So going off of our previous conversation, the current state of the U.S. economy is nerve-wracking for college students looking to enter the workforce in the next few years. What can you do as a member of Congress to make things better for young people?
I think that post-secondary and secondary education should be actually, I think we should be funding it publicly. Our STEM fields, we're not doing enough in our STEM fields, and we're not doing enough in our public vocational sectors. There's some reports that say 50 to 60% of our plumbers are going to retire in the next 3 years. Where are they going to come from? We're not training them. I'd like to see the Pell Grant be able to be used for other things than just a degree program. Why can't it be used for a journeyman program or a journeyman electrician program? The economy today and our technology is such that we're not training our high school students to be viably employed. So therefore, I think that our public education needs to be extended at least to a degree in the STEM fields. I'm not about big government giveaways, but at the same time, I recognize that we need a workforce for the future. I'm also, when we talk about, the energy deal that we're talking about, the fact of the matter, if we train people in STEM fields, we're going to recognize that the Green New Deal is just not ready. I recognize that there's laudability in getting into the green technologies, but there's not one lithium mine in the United States, and we're switching to lithium cars with about an 18-and-a-half-year life cycle. Where are you going to get your lithium from? You're just trading one devil for another. We need to have a national policy that goes out 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. But when it comes to education, it needs to be imperative, it needs to be fast, and it's going to be expensive.
Thanks, Mr. Gilbert. Same question for Mr. Magaziner.
Yeah, listen, the answer is we need more good jobs in Rhode Island, and as Rhode Island's next member of Congress, I will make sure that the federal funding is here to spur innovative industries that will make it easier for people to stay here in Rhode Island and make a good living, right? Advanced manufacturing, biotech, and yes, clean energy. I mean, there's tremendous opportunity to create good jobs here in Rhode Island in offshore wind and in the marine trades. And a lot of this can be spurred by federal funding from Washington coming to places like URI to spur research and innovation. The other thing that we got to recognize is that for a lot of young people coming out of school right now, they're not able to pursue their passion because they're bogged down by crushing student loan debt. That's forcing them to take paths that they otherwise wouldn't want to take. And so one of the things that I want to prioritize is lowering the interest rates on student loans, because the federal government is the lender in many cases for student loans, and it's unconscionable that the federal government is charging 6 or 7% interest on student loans. If we can reduce that burden by lowering rates, make it easier for people to stay here and get a good job here in Rhode Island, we can do great things for the future of our state.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mr. Fung.
Yes, students are coming out of, whether it's this university, any other college university across the country, with crushing debt, basically mortgages right now. And I also, too, would focus not only just on the interest rate, but we need to do more. Bill touched a little bit about Pell Grants. What I would propose is doubling the amount of Pell Grants that goes back directly to the institution so that students don't have to borrow as much and be saddled with that much dollars when they come out of school. Next thing, we have to really take a serious and hard look at colleges and universities and the cost of that education and what goes into it. Why is it so high? Does every college and university need a rock wall? I might, make a little light about that, but that's some of the things that we really have to take a look at. But finally, on the dollars going in from the federal government into a university like URI, which is our flagship university, or my alma mater, Rhode Island College, we've got to fund a lot more research, innovative research that's going on to support a lot of the educational system so it reduces some of those burdens on the students. I love what Mark and the university is doing here on the blue economy. That's a great opportunity to support our ocean state and the industries that could come here and are already here. I want to support dollars, especially infrastructure dollars, into building back up Quonset, Galilee, Providence Port, to support a lot of the existing, not only green industries that are here, but other manufacturers that are dotting up and down, that port, and reduce this logjam in the supply chain, because a lot of it is the infrastructure.
Thank you. Mr. Magaziner, poll after poll shows that far and away the greatest concern of Rhode Island voters is the cost of living. Despite that, your campaign commercials have focused on issues like abortion, January 6th, and other things other than the economy. Does that show that you're out of touch?
Listen, when I announced this campaign, one of the first things we did was put a detailed plan on our website, more detailed than Allan's, on a range of issues, including lowering the cost of living. And there's a number of things that we can and must do. So again, I'm for suspending the gas tax. I'm for expanding domestic energy production. I'm for bringing more manufacturing jobs back to the United States, including Rhode Island, so that we don't have supply chains running all across the world that are more expensive.
This is a national thing, though.
Yeah,
Why?
and importantly, capping the cost of prescription drugs, which is crushing people as well. But again, if you're looking for a contrast, the big contrast is that I'm talking about cracking down on the big drug companies, the big oil companies that are overcharging people, which the Republicans in Congress won't do because that's where they get their funding from. So again, if you go to my website, you will see detailed plans on a range of issues, including lowering energy costs, lowering health care costs, raising wages, which is another part of this equation. We have to make it easier for people to earn a good living in our state and in our country as well.
Mr. Fung, my question for you, did former President Trump cause lasting harm to the United States?
Well, I can tell you, I'm not President Trump. I don't act that way. I'm not about divisiveness. I've shown that in 12 years as mayor of the city of Cranston, working bipartisan, doing the right thing, taking a city that was in the red, fixing it and making it one of the best cities to live. And that's how I'm going to operate down in Washington, D.C. But I also want to pivot back. Hold on. Can I just finish for a minute? I just want to pivot back to one thing when Seth was talking about myself. There is a big difference between myself and him and what we put out there. He's outright lying about some of my positions in his ads, spending millions on trying to paint me as not only some extremist, but my positions on abortion are an outright lie, Seth. Will you please admit that? Because I will not support a national abortion ban or criminalize it. He wants to keep pushing these fallacies because he's losing. So that's the one thing I need to correct and put out there.
Mr. Magaziner.
Allan, you can lie to the people about where you are today, but you can't lie about your record, because your record is in the public record. 3 years ago, many of us worked together to protect abortion rights in Rhode Island. And Allan, a lot of Republicans said, oh, Roe v. Wade's never going to be overturned, you're fear-mongering. Well, look what happened. We passed a law in Rhode Island 3 years ago to protect women in Rhode Island. Allan was against that bill, vocally. I was for it, just like most Rhode Islanders. There's a fundamental difference between us here. I trust women to make the right choice about when and whether to terminate a pregnancy. Allan thinks it should be up to politicians and judges. And listen, politicians, like Allan and others, they will say whatever they need to say to get elected. But
you're not
they will say whatever they want to say to get elected.
Please include that.
Well, my record is that I have supported women's rights and abortion rights every step of the way. Your record is 3 years ago you were against it, then in the spring you said it should be up to the states, then 10 minutes ago you changed again, and 10 minutes from now. Listen, in Washington, You know where I will stand on this issue. I will be for Rhode Island women every time. You couldn't trust Allan over the last 20 years when he changed positions this, that, and the other way. You couldn't trust him 3 years ago when he opposed the bill to do this in Rhode Island. So you can't trust him in Washington either. But you know where I stand. The people, there's no ambiguity about where I am.
Oh, there's plenty of ambiguity where you are.
Mr. Fung, 30
Let's take a look. Let's take a
Mr.
look.
abortion rights?
No,
Absolutely.
wait a minute.
Mr. Fung,
Yeah,
30
yeah.
seconds on that.
I'm sorry.
If you'd like to respond to Mr. Magaziner, 30 seconds on
Oh,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, look, Seth, you are lying. You are lying because you have been constantly losing behind in the polls. Let's face
You
it. I
opposed
have
the bill
never
3 years
said,
ago.
Mr. Magaziner,
I
let
have
him
never
finish.
said that I would support a national abortion ban. I would never do that. Never said it.
You
And
opposed
you
the bill.
just
Hang on,
double
Mr.
down
Magaziner.
it. I've never said that.
You opposed the bill 3 years
Never
ago.
said it,
You
Seth.
said it should be a states' rights
Look,
issue. And most importantly,
and
your
most
first
importantly-
vote would be for
and
Kevin
most
McCarthy, who has said
importantly-
he's going to push a national abortion ban through
Mr.
Congress.
Magaziner,
And
hang on,
most
hang on.
importantly-
Mr. Fung, you didn't really answer my question, so I briefly want to bring it back to you. I understand that, you say you're not banging the drum for Donald Trump, but did he cause more harm than good to the United States?
He certainly caused a lot of divisiveness to the United States. And like I said, Ian, I am not Donald Trump. I'm not sitting here trying to, defend everything he says. I am here because of the failed policies of our current president, Joe Biden. That's what is on the minds of all the people in the 2nd District in Rhode Island. These failed economic policies that are crippling many families across the district. That's what this election in November is about, and that's what I'm focused on.
Let's go to another issue where attack ads have been flying, Social Security. Mr. Magaziner has attacked Mr. Fung, saying that he and Republicans would cut Social Security. Today, the Washington Post reported that GOP leadership is looking at or wants to use the debt ceiling or a government shutdown to cut Social Security. So to Mr. Fung, if you are elected, what would you do if GOP leadership said that they wanted to make changes to Social Security, including raising the retirement age, and are using the debt ceiling to do it?
Yeah. Here's the thing, another outright lie from Seth saying that I would support cutting Social Security. Here's why I would not do that. You see that woman that's sitting in the front row right there? That's my mom. My mom, who after a 35-year career opening and running Conglin Restaurant, a small family business after her and my dad came to this country as immigrants, retired. She's on Social Security. That fixed income, like millions of other mothers and fathers, grandparents across the country, I will stand up and make sure they do not cut Social Security down in Washington, D.C.
So what would you, and just to follow up on that, so what would you do to fix Social Security?
There are different bipartisan proposals down there to strengthen it.
Can you pick one? What do you think?
Yes, scrap the cap. So that individuals like Mr. Magaziner's family who doesn't rely upon it, like mine, would shoulder a little bit more of the burden to help sustain Social Security.
So, Mr. Magaziner, what do you say?
So listen, the Republican leadership in Washington isn't even trying to hide it. They have said that one of their top priorities is to cut Social Security and Medicare. Kevin McCarthy literally co-authored a book about how he wanted to cut Social Security. The head Republican of the Budget Committee, a guy named Jason Smith, who, like Kevin McCarthy, came to Rhode Island. Allan brought him to campaign with him here, said in an interview with Bloomberg 2 weeks ago that his top priority, if the Republicans take control, his top priority as chair of the Budget Committee would be to cut Social Security and Medicare, and that he is willing to shut down the government in order to get his way. Listen, I want Congress to be run by people who don't want to cut Social Security and Medicare. I want Congress to be run by people who want to support seniors in Rhode Island. Allan has decided that he is going to support a leadership team that is not even trying to hide it, and has said that cutting Social Security and Medicare is one of their top priorities. And let's not forget, every single Republican, including Allan, in Congress, all said that they were opposed to the Inflation Reduction Act, which capped the cost of prescriptions for people on Medicare. So for him to say that he's for Social Security, he's for Medicare, but he wants to put the leadership team in Washington that has made this one of their top priorities to cut those programs is beyond disingenuous. That's like saying, you know, I'm going to put the fox in charge of the hen house, but don't worry, I like hens, I'm pro-hens, you know, I like it, but I'm going to put the fox in charge, just don't worry about it.
30 seconds, Mr.
respond to
Fung. Yeah,
that.
you can
Absolutely,
respond.
because let's take a real look at who really has weakened Social Security. Seth, because of this rampant inflation, record 40-year high inflation that's going on, it's the Democrats that have been in charge through the rampant spending that's going on, because more income is not coming into our pockets than that's going out the door for our foods. Seth, a gallon of milk is up to almost $5.
Alan,
I went to go
Democrats
buy.
created
Mr.
Social
Magazine,
Security.
let him finish.
Republicans have been trying to cut it for the last 80 years, including your
And it
friends
hasn't
McCarthy and
happened.
Smith who have been
And
here.
Seth,
Oh
it
yeah,
has
fear
not
mongering again.
happened.
Because
Let's get down to reality.
Yeah, the reality is that Kevin McCarthy and Jason
And
Smith
the-
have
and
said
the
that they
reality,
want to cut
Seth,
Social
is-
Mr.
Security.
Magazine, let him answer the question. Okay.
Yes, I am trying to
Will you give
answer
me
the
time
question.
afterwards?
And
Thanks.
Let's move on.
We're gonna move on.
Move on to a community question.
Can I just finish my thought before
Please.
I go on? But in all seriousness, when spending is this out of control, caused by the people that you support and want to double down with, they're the ones that are weakening Social Security, because there's no way anyone on a fixed income can heat their homes, feed their families, or as well as get back to work.
I support expanding Social Security. The Republicans that he wants to put in charge have already said that cutting it is their top priority.
We're going to move on. You're listening to our 2022 Gubernatorial Candidates Forum, hosted by the Public Radio, the Providence Journal, and the University of Rhode Island. We're broadcasting live from the University of Rhode Island at 89.3 FM and streaming through the Providence Journal. We asked Rhode Islanders to submit questions for the candidates. Here's one of the many questions we got from Barbara Watts.
Hi, I'm Barbara Watts from Kingston. The voters in District 2 are very concerned about climate change, so my question is related to that. According to a poll conducted by the Yale Program on Climate Communications, 72% in our district support regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant, and 63% want Congress to do more to address global warming. So my question is, if elected, how will you approach policy to reduce carbon pollution emissions that are causing climate change?
Let's start with Mr. Gilbert.
Yes, thank you. The carbon footprint and the carbon technology, one of the things that we need to address is carbon sequestration. It's a heady issue, it's a little esoteric, but right now, like I said, the green technologies aren't there to fully replace the carbon footprint that we're currently using. So what I would like to do is, and I would suggest immediately, we do have technologies for carbon sequestration. We can start supporting those technologies as well as the offshore and the solar power energies. But I also think something else that we miss is part of our grid. Our electric grid is made up of electrical wires, and those wires, again, they're very esoteric. It's a very heady issue, but changing the wires, today we have technology where the wires have much less resistance. And by swapping out some of our technology, we can start increasing our capacity. So it's kind of like what we did with our bridges here in the state of Rhode Island. We let them decay.
Thank you. Mr. Fung.
But we can start looking at some of those other things.
Hang on, Mr. Gilbert.
Understood.
On top of some of the technology that Bill was referring to, there are simple measures that we can do. Increasing our forestry, making sure that urban areas such as those in Providence or hard landscapes have more trees being planted. That's one of the simple solutions that can kind of help. On top of that, as mayor, I went through and seen the results of climate change, where man-made decisions in the past have caused those not one but two historic devastating floods that put half the city underwater. Floodplain restoration is another area that we can do. We spent some of those federal dollars to buy back properties and restore it to its floodplain. Lastly, because we're the ocean state, coastal preservation is something that's critically important as well as additional dollars to fund, like I said before, the blue economy and green economy, some of the great research is being done here at URI.
Mr. Magaziner.
Yeah, we've got tremendous opportunity to create a lot of jobs transitioning to a clean energy economy, but we have to be aggressive about it. Listen, as state treasurer, one of the first things that I worked on, we set up programs at the State Infrastructure Bank to fund renewable energy and energy efficiency projects all across the state. The town of West Warwick has not paid an electric bill on its town buildings in 5 years because they have solar panels and windmills that our program helped fund. We're doing coastal resiliency in Westerly. We did street lights to LEDs in Warwick that have saved taxpayers millions of dollars. And at the federal level, there's a lot we can do to deliver resources to help speed that transition, particularly offshore wind. I think it's a real source of pride for us in Rhode Island that the 2nd Congressional District is the birthplace of the offshore wind industry, which is creating a lot of jobs and is on pace to power more than 60% of the state's electricity demand by the end of the decade. But at the risk of sounding like a broken record here, listen, Congress just passed the most historic investment in clean energy in our nation's history, and every single Republican voted against it. Allan said he was against it too. So let's get real. It takes leadership. It takes the willingness to stand up to the oil and gas industry and to make real investments in climate, like Democrats in Congress just passed and every single Republican was against.
We've got another community question. This one is from Angie Gonzalez.
Hi, my name is Angie Gonzalez, and I reside in Providence, Rhode Island. And my question for the candidate is, how will you be more integrated in the urban communities, and how will you be able to support them?
We'll start this.
I couldn't hear the question. How would be integrated into, I couldn't hear a question.
The question, how you will integrate urban communities, communities of color.
Oh, okay, sorry.
We're going to start with Mr. Magaziner on this one.
Yeah, so this is something that I have a lot of experience in as state treasurer. You know, as treasurer, I led a state school construction initiative that has invested billions of dollars repairing and replacing schools across the state of Rhode Island, schools all over the district, but particularly in urban areas, because every kid deserves to go to a great school regardless of zip code. Connected with that, we created a lot of jobs in the building and construction trades, and I've been working with organizations like Building Futures to make sure that people from urban communities have the opportunities for those career pathways as well. In Congress, I will make it a priority to deliver resources across the whole district, but particularly to those hardest hit communities where people deserve opportunity. I started out my career as a public school teacher. I taught in a low-income school district. And what I saw is that every kid from every zip code has the ability to thrive and to achieve if the adults in power take their responsibilities seriously to support every community. I think about that experience every day. I think about my students every day, and I will continue to when I'm Rhode Island's next member of Congress.
Mr. Gilbert, what would you do?
I think one of the first things that we could do is the information superhighway. With what COVID showed us is, I would like to be the first state and the first country in the world that provides free Wi-Fi for everybody. Without a Wi-Fi connection, you are not connected to the world anymore, and you're being left behind. We saw it in the inner cities in South Providence with our COVID. We need to be able to do things like Zoom. I also think about aftercare programs and full day required pre-K. You know, the better hand up that we can. And I'm with Mr. Magaziner on this one. Whether you live in 02818 East Greenwich or you live in 903 Providence, it shouldn't depend on what your education looks like. I think we need to change the funding formula drastically throughout the country. In Rhode Island, I think we need to go to a statewide funding formula instead of just by the town, because it's being exclusionary. I think the other thing that we can do is there's a lot of inner city use when you're a guy that looks like me and you're from Narragansett. It's totally different. I think one of the things that we need to do is get rid of a qualified immunity for police officers and have better accountability. I think that we don't recognize the struggles that some of those people have up there just walking home from school.
And Mr. Fung, last word.
Yeah. First of all, being mayor of our state's second largest city, Cranston, which is an urban core city, let's face it, and I made sure that our resources were properly divided amongst all areas, regardless of zip code, making sure that our schools were transformed. I heavily supported that school construction bond, and we're putting in dollars to support the new school that's going on the eastern side in that Garden City School, and they're going to be investing more dollars into many of the other schools all across the district. I made sure that we had additional dollars for technology invested into many of the schools. But most importantly, we also partnered with social service organizations like CCAP, Comprehensive Community Action Plans, so we're providing additional resources for people in need. But Lastly, we also invested in our employees to making sure that we have a diverse employment system at all levels. Most importantly, I'm proud of the fact that I had the first female chief of staff, first female director of administration in our city's history, the first Hispanic chief of staff, as well as the first visually impaired, blind, city solicitor. When you create that type of inclusive type environment, focusing on individuals at all levels, that's how you succeed as a city. And that's the same type of approach I'll take to Washington, D.C., to make sure those investments continue on in our cities and towns, in our state.
Thank you. So we have our next community question from Greg Jarrett.
My name is Greg Garrett. I live in Providence. This is my question for the people running for Congress in the 2nd District in Rhode Island. How far will you go to protect the right to choose for pregnant women?
Let's start with Mr. Fung, please.
Yes. Like I said before, unlike what Mr. Magaziner is alleging his ad, I will not support a national abortion ban or criminalize it, period. I do support a woman's right to make that deeply personal decision, and it's something that I can never, let anyone else know, but they need to have that right preserved.
Mr. Magaziner.
You don't have to ask me because you know where I stand. I stand with women. I believe that it should be the woman's choice, not politicians in Washington, not judges. And unlike Allan, I have been consistent on that throughout my time in public service, and I'll continue to be consistent about it in Congress. You'll never have to worry if a bill comes up, where's Magaziner going to be on this one? Is he going to be yes, no, maybe? I'll be with Rhode Island women every time.
How about you, Mr. Gilbert? Please hold your applause.
I believe in the right for women to choose, but I'd like to caveat something here. Just, since Roe v. Wade, it's been a litmus test question. I don't know why anybody's shocked that it happened, because for years we've asked Supreme Court candidates what their views is. Every politician that's ever knocked on the door in the state of Rhode Island or most throughout the United States has been asked, what's your opinion on abortion? Because we knew it could change. Now, it doesn't matter if you have a red wave or a blue wave go to Washington. What's going to happen now, without having a really good debate amongst ourselves, it can change every 2 years. Every time we can not send Allan and Mr. Seth Magaziner can have his way. Or we can send Allan and we can stop abortion, and 2 years later we can have abortion again. I think we really have to have these national debates that I've been talking about. We got to be able to sit and have this long-term vision. What does America look like? I think a lot of people don't want to have abortion as a sense of birth control. The old saying, they should be rare and safe. I think the real discussion becomes not so much about abortion, but at what point is it inception? At what point does it become life? Because people aren't trying to ban abortions, they're trying to ban what they think is murder. And we have to have those discussions.
Thank you,
but
Mr.
I tell
Gilbert.
you, for myself right now, I don't know why anybody waited. The Democrats are in power right now. What are they waiting for? You should have raced in and went and did it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to a lightning round. We're looking for short answers, maybe one-word answer. Complete this sentence, Mr. Magaziner. The thing most holding Rhode Island back from achieving its economic potential is?
Cost of living.
Mr. Gilbert, the thing holding Rhode Island back from achieving its economic potential is?
Sure, I think 50 years of Democrat control with no leadership and no plan.
Mr. Fung.
Continued high taxes that are crushing us at the worst possible time.
Mr. Fung, who's your top political role model?
Actually, Charlie Baker.
Mr. Gilbert.
Top political role model, Kennedy and Reagan.
Mr. Magaziner.
FDR.
And let's start with please hold your applause. Mr. Gilbert, should there be term limits for members of the U.S. House of Representatives? If so, how many?
I don't prefer either way, but if we had them, I'd go for 12 years.
Mr. Magaziner?
Yes, I'd say 8 to 10 years.
Mr. Fung?
3 terms.
Let's go to Patrick Anderson.
And we'll start with Mr. Fung. Should the U.S. build more nuclear power?
Actually, I appreciate an all-inclusive approach, which could include nuclear power because the technology is different than what we've had back in the dark days.
Is that yes?
Like I said, I support an all energy policy, including the new technology like nuclear power.
Mr. Magaziner.
I'm open to it, but my understanding is it's not cost competitive anymore.
So no, if they shouldn't be allowed, should not be
If there's
permitted?
a new technology that makes it more cost competitive, I have to look at it.
Mr. Gilbert.
I believe that's one of the technologies that will bridge us into the green energy new deal that we want to see. So yes, I would do it, and the reason why they're not cost competitive is because of the overburdens and the regulation.
Mr. Magaziner, have you asked Joe Biden to come campaign for you here in Rhode Island?
I haven't asked anyone from out of state. I'm focused on Rhode Island.
Mr. Fung, was Governor Ron DeSantis wrong to ship migrants to Martha's Vineyard?
First and foremost,
Yes.
I would not have done.
Yes is the answer.
Yes, he was.
Yes or no?
Yes,
all.
I would not. Bill, can I please answer?
Okay, but it's yes.
Thanks for answering for me. Little bipartisanship there. What I can tell you is that was wrong. I, am the son of immigrant parents. We should not be playing with people's lives like that. But it does underscore a very serious message of what is going on at the southern border with the free flow of fentanyl and the need for an orderly process of people coming to this country.
And for Mr. Gilbert, should we add more states to the union? And if so, what should they be?
We've always discussed Guam and Puerto Rico, but I think it's up to them. I'm not so into annexing territories at this point.
So no, Mr. Fung,
I'm sorry, what was the question?
should we add any more states? And if yes, which should they be?
Right now, I think I would leave it up to the individual states to vote, and then, we'll make a decision depending on who comes up, because I know this is a question that always comes up with Washington, D.C., whether being added or not.
And you
So-
don't have any feeling on what, yes or no?
I'll leave it to the voters down in Washington, D.C. to see what they decide, and then I'll make a decision.
Mr. Magaziner.
So if indeed the voters in Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, or other territories want to become a state, then they should have the ability to do so. All United States citizens deserve the same rights.
And last one from me on lightning round. I'll start with Mr. Magaziner. Should we repeal the Trump tax cuts from 2017, or keep them repealed when they come back?
So listen, I would not support any tax increase on anyone making less than $400,000 a year, but the tax cuts under Donald Trump, disproportionately, almost 90%, went to the top 1%, to millionaires and billionaires. Those should be repealed. Those people should pay their fair share.
Mr. Fung, keep those tax cuts?
I'm generally supportive of tax cuts across the board because it helps, whether it's for working families, people of all levels, especially as we're on the cusp of recession. People are going to need help.
And Mr. Gilbert.
I would keep the tax cuts right now, but we need an overhaul of our tax system.
On to Juliana.
Okay, so we're going to start with Mr. Fung. Do you support restrictions on teaching about race and racism in schools?
As the son of immigrant parents, parents came first generation, I think we really need to have that ability to learn about each of our cultures. In fact, I was very proud of my wife, who this past session was the main sponsor of a bill that, required, starting next year, the teaching of Asian American education and our experience within our curriculum. I think the more that we can expand and learn about each cultures, it would reduce a lot of the rhetoric that's out there. And, part of that bill was to help stem that anti-Asian hate that has been prevalent across the country.
Mr. Magaziner.
Yeah, listen, it is absolutely despicable the way some people have tried to interject politics into the classroom. It should be up to educators and parents with community involvement to set curriculums. And yeah, as a former teacher, I can tell you that we do students a disservice if we do not teach them about race, if we do not teach them about the real issues that they're going to face as they grow into adulthood. And so, yeah, that absolutely should be part of the curriculum.
And Mr. Gilbert.
And that's interesting. Brown versus the Board of Education desegregated the schools. In 1977, I was bused to an inner city. I was the minority when I went to school. So I understand it. I think when you ask a question about curriculum, though, what's the curriculum? What are we teaching about race? Are we teaching hatred and division, or are we teaching customs and culture? I think there's a significant difference between what some people consider critical race theory in one state and what they consider critical race theory in another state. I think it's imperative that the parents are made aware of what the educational choices and the curriculum that their students are getting. And right now, there's some secretiveness that needs to stop.
Just a reminder, candidates, this is still a lightning round. Please, we got a little bit away from that, but please keep your answers on the concise side for Julia's 2 remaining questions here.
Okay, so should the United States continue to offer aid to Ukraine for the length of its war with Russia? We're going to start off with Mr. Magaziner.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I do support additional humanitarian aid there because the devastation you're seeing coming out of Ukraine is unimaginable.
I would increase it.
Okay. And lastly, do you support President Biden's climate change policies? We'll start with Mr. Gilbert.
No, I think they're pig-headed.
No, because it is taxing us at the worst possible time when many of our residents, not only in the district, are facing crippling energy prices. 47% electricity increase, 15% on gas, and home heating oil is coming right around the corner. We can't afford that.
We have time. Oh, sorry, Mr. Magaziner.
The priority has to be lowering the cost of energy, and that's why I support making America energy independent, expanding domestic energy production. But clean energy has an absolutely vital role in achieving that. And if we want to push back on Vladimir Putin and other dictators around the world, the best thing that we could do is invest in clean energy so that we're not beholden to thugs around the world.
We have time for one more question. We're getting close to closing statements. Mr. Magaziner, should please limit your answer to 1 minute. Should there be any restrictions on abortion?
I think it should be the woman's choice.
Okay. Please. Mr. Fung, you say you would not support a national abortion ban, but it was the Republican Party that engineered the rise of the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade. Considering that, why should women concerned about abortion restrictions vote for you?
No, first of all, I'm not an extreme like what we just heard with Mr. Magazine on this issue. I would preserve that ability for a woman to make that important, deeply personal medical decision and reserve the ability for late-term abortions for the life of the mother, rape or incest. That's what, you'll get from Allan Fung down in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Gilbert, you referred earlier to the view that's been uttered in politics, abortion should be legal but rare. This country is so divided on the issue, how does the country move forward?
With more speech and more talk about it. I think it's imperative. Like I said, in 2 years, no matter what happens this 2 years, the next Congress could change it. And then the Supreme Court could change it again. Then the Congress could go back and change it again. These are living, deep, breathing issues that unless we have living, deep, breathing conversations, we're going to keep having, just like gun control, just like immigration, just like border protection. These aren't one-and-done issues. So we need to stop treating it like that. Why is it a litmus test issue? Why can't it just be an issue that we discuss?
We're going to go to closing statements. Let's start with Bill Gilbert. You have 90 seconds.
I thought it was 2 minutes.
All right, 2 minutes.
I was just eavesdropping on his conversation earlier. But, again, my name is Bill Gilbert, and I think most Americans feel that the 2 main parties have become hyperpartisan, haven't worked for the people's interest in years. Today's voters are looking for a new, common-sense political home. My We the People campaign offers voters a true and viable third choice that neither of the 2 current parties have the courage to offer. I will not shy away from the controversial issues. I will address the dire need for our country and our businesses to have easier access to vocational and trade training. These aren't partisan issues. They're just tough people issues. Cancel culture and the radical partisan politics must be eliminated at all costs. Americans have become afraid to engage in what used to be dinner table and water cooler conversations for fear for financial backlash and sometimes even physical violence today. I am not going to censor my ideas to please the radical fringes, as resources are not infinite and hard choices must be made. I'm for abolishing the made-up doctrine of qualified immunity, but that does not translate that I'm anti-cop. I would gladly support doubling the headcount of our law enforcement in many of our broken cities if they had half of the absolute power they wield today. We shouldn't fear the police. What happened to the officer that wore the nice white shirt? Officer friendly. Most of our inner city schools struggle teaching student populations that are comprised of more than 10 different first languages, with many students speaking no English at all. This is unsustainable and a travesty for the children in these schools. I recognize the need for strong borders, and many Democrats do too. Many Democrats do too. I call on them now to join me for common cause to enforce our now weak borders and complete the wall. Just because I and others support strong borders does not mean we're racist.
Mr. Gilbert, thank you. That's time. Mr. Magaziner, you have 2 minutes.
Oh, thank you all. Listen, as I talk to voters across the district, what I hear is that people love our state and they love our country, but they're frustrated. They're working hard, but their incomes are not keeping up with the bills. They see fundamental rights being stripped away and are worried about what's going to come next. And our politics in Washington have become toxic. What I learned as state treasurer is that with the right leaders in place, you can get good things done that will help working people. As treasurer, I launched a school construction program that's put 20,000 people to work fixing schools across Rhode Island. We launched a program that's helped hundreds of victims of domestic violence relocate away from their abusers. But what I learned is that in order to really get things done, you have to have the courage to stand up to the powerful interests. And that is the difference in this race. I will stand up to the oil companies and the prescription drug companies that are making billions in profits while people are paying too much. I will stand up to anyone who wants to restrict fundamental rights, including a woman's right to choose. And I will stand up to the extremists in Washington, not elect them to run the House of Representatives. These extremists who overturn elections or try to, and have committed themselves to cutting Social Security and Medicare. I will stand up to them because I am not in their pocket like my opponent is. So listen, we can do great things in Congress to help working people, to raise wages, to expand benefits, to lower the cost of health care, and to provide real opportunity. But what it takes is the courage to stand up and do the right thing. I always will.
Please hold your applause. Mr. Fung, you have 2 minutes.
Yes. First of all, thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Providence Journal, Public Radio, and URI for our first forum in this very important election. You know, unlike my opponent, who is in the pocket of the people that are crippling our economy right now through rampant inflation, 40-year record highs, I, on the other hand, want to go down and right our ship. Our country needs strong leadership, and the men and women of the 2nd Congressional District deserve strong leadership that will right this economic ship that is listing in the wind right now. And most importantly, leadership that's going to keep our neighborhoods safe. We'll work together to lower home heating costs. We'll work together to lower gas prices and make sure that you can afford to feed your families as you sit around the dining room table. We'll bring back common sense to Washington, D.C., and bring our successful formula that I've been privileged to have for 12 years on Park Avenue in Cranston to Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. We'll help to end, as Bill was talking about, that hyper-partisanship that made us all disgusted with what's going on with national politics. You know my record of working across the aisle and doing the right things. I'm not going to be the partisan answer, but I will be the Rhode Island answer to all of our challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Allan Fung, and for over a decade, we did a lot of amazing things to transform our state's 2nd largest city. Now, I'm asking for an opportunity to serve you once again and humbly ask for your support as your next congressman in the 2nd District. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold your applause. Thank you for listening to this forum. This has been a production of the Public's Radio, the Providence Journal, and the University of Rhode Island. We had technical assistance from URI's Ethan Hicks, Katie Babulia, and James Zong. Thanks to Chief Engineer Aaron Reed at the Public's Radio. Our stage director is Nate Halda. Our community producers are Will Richmond and Maddie Mott. Thanks also to Karen Sescio, Dawn Bergantino, Bruno Pariso, URI Police, URI Facilities Operation, and Figaro the Security Dog. Co-executive producers are Sally Isley, Whitman Littlefield, Erin Dion, and David Eng. Thanks also to Tori Malatia, the Public's Radio General Manager, and Amina Kothari, Director of the Harrington School of Communications and Media. And now, please give your candidates a hand. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Seth Magaziner, Allan Fung, and Bill Gilbert. Thank you to the panel, Patrick Anderson and Juliana Lepore. Forgive me, Juliana. I'm Ian Donnis. Sorry, I botched your name once.
That's okay.
Good job.
Thanks.